Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors Land Use and Transportation Committee meeting from Monday, July 17th, 2017. My name is Mark Farrell. I'll be chairing this committee. I am joined by our committee vice chair, Supervisor Aaron Peskin, as well as Supervisor Kitty Tang. I want to thank Ben English and Jesse Larson from SFGTV for covering the meeting today, as well as the clerk of our committee, Erica Major. Madam Clerk, do we have any announcements?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the July 25th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, Madam Clerk, would you call item number 1?
Yes, item number 1 is an ordinance amending the Public Works Code to update provisions on street encroachment permits, establish appeals procedures and fees, waive the annual public right-of-way occupancy assessment fee, modify the street encroachment permit process, amend the administrative code to establish encroachment maintenance fund, and affirming determination under CEQA.
Okay, thank you very much. We have Robin here from OEWD to speak on this item. And then just colleagues note this is sponsored by the Mayor's Office.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Farrell and Supervisors Peskin and Tang. Robin Havens with the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. I'm here today with Public Works staff to describe this exciting update to a very archaic part of the City Code. We believe these updates could make the city process more transparent, clear, and could help various public benefits come online faster. Supervisors, I'm going to walk you through a short 2-slide summary, and then we're available to answer any questions that you may have. This update contains a general cleanup of old language, including acknowledging that this permit is known as a major encroachment permit, what we all call it, not just street encroachment permit, which is currently in the code. It adds an explicit process for appeals of permit revocation or denial to the Board of Supervisors. No process has been identified in the code, so this update clarifies how it would unfold, given that we will have many more of these permits than in the past. It also includes an appeal process to the Board of Appeals for encroachment permits that Public Works might handle administratively. And for the third bullet, this update adds a process to address the large multi-phase projects such as Hope SF projects and Park Merced, where an initial master permit would be provided for approval to the board. After that initial approval to the Board of Supervisors, subsequent phases of the development would get annexed into the master permit administratively, giving Public Works the flexibility to issue subsequent individual permits. And lastly, the ordinance would now require open space technology connections, communication services, to be included in the design for any permit that involves street reconstruction for a majority of a through street. This should help support various efforts to increase internet access citywide. In addition, the ordinance modifies the current board waiver of Public Works processing and inspection fees for projects in the public interest, and instead waives the annual occupancy assessment fee for those public interest projects. Under the change, Public Works would be paid for its permit review inspection, but no annual fees would be charged to the project that construct public amenities in streets and sidewalks. Processing and inspection fees can still be waived by the Board of Supervisors via an ordinance on a case-by-case basis. So next, in most situations for an encroachment permit, the fronting property owner might be the permittee, but in some situations, this is not the case, and the permittee is not a nearby property owner. For those spaces and to better protect the city for future maintenance costs, this legislation creates a new Public Works encroachment maintenance fund for permits issued or assigned to non-fronting property owners. These permits would pay into the fund a percentage of the equivalent of 2 years' worth of annual maintenance costs, and it would be paid in installments over the first 10 years of the permit life. The fund would be established via the ordinance in the admin code. Public Works could use the funds to address maintenance, repairs, and or replacement at the location of the permit where the permittee is paying the fee, or at another encroachment permit area in the city that needs maintenance, repairs, and a replacement. And lastly, this update creates a new administratively approved encroachment permit to address 2 different situations. The appeal process here is open to the general public, and it goes to the Board of Appeals like minor sidewalk encroachments do currently. The first one is designed to address permits requested by city agencies and state and federal government. Currently,
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last sentence about what goes to the Board of Appeals?
you bet. The appeals process for these two that I'm about to describe is open to the general public, and it goes to the Board of Appeals just like a minor sidewalk encroachment. The first one is designated to address permits requested from city agencies, state and federal agencies. Currently, government agencies have to go through the Board of Supervisors process with Public Works to approve major encroachment permits for projects like Art Commission murals, uni-operator restrooms, Golden Gate Transit bus stops, and signs. So in my last bullet here, the second administratively approved permit that we're proposing here would be a temporary encroachment permit that Public Works could issue for city department authorized and city co-sponsored projects that are in place for no more than 2 years with the ability to get 1 6-month extension. Public Works is very excited about this opportunity for small neighborhood groups or other individuals that want to provide such short-term amenities for their communities. This temporary permit program would be independent from People for Places permits or street plaza permits. So to wrap up, thank you for your attention to the matter today, supervisors. We're happy to be able to present you with opportunities for appropriately streamlining processes and bring forth public benefits faster with better long-term maintenance, certainty, and transparency. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And colleagues, I want to make sure to note John Malmet from our city attorney's office is here, who has spent, I know, a lot of time working on this issue, so thank you, John, for that, and to answer any questions we might have. And I know this is a long time in coming, so thank you for codifying a number of these processes, and I see some of my colleagues may have some questions. And I do, colleagues, a number of amendments were just passed around that have been previously drafted that I was asked to introduce here. I'm happy to answer any questions about them, or certainly I know our deputy city attorney is here as well. So with that, Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. I definitely want to thank staff and City Attorney John Malamet for your incredible work on this. I got a really great detailed briefing from all of you, but just for purposes of this public hearing, I'm wondering if you can just describe some of the differences between just a regular street encroachment versus major, how it was distinguished based on current law and why it was so confusing about it.
Okay.
John Malmet from the City Attorney's Office, through the chair. One of the problems we've had over the years with the major encroachment permit process is there really wasn't any explicit trigger that would take an encroachment and either put it in the box of a major encroachment permit or a minor sidewalk encroachment permit. So one of the things this legislation does is come up with the explicit triggers that would put something in the category of a major encroachment permit. One standard example is if we had an encroachment that didn't involve the fronting property owner, where we could actually record the permit against the fronting property, that would be one of the triggers. So Robin earlier had mentioned, for example, anytime we have a city government project encroachment or a state encroachment permit, they're never the fronting property owner because we're not necessarily owning that property. So Golden Gate Transit, being a non-fronting property owner, did need to get a major encroachment permit for what was relatively minor type work. We're changing that in this legislation to be an administrative process for other governmental agencies. But that would be one example. That's contrasted with minor sidewalk encroachment permits, which are fairly small, minor permit encroachments in front of someone's property. So it would be like a planter box. Sometimes it's a bench, a special bench they want to put in front of their house. Fairly minor things. There's some dimensional requirements in the Public Works Code of what makes a minor sidewalk encroachment permit, but there really wasn't much for the major. So that's one of the things that this tries to do.
Great, thank you. And just as a refresher, so I understand there's an application fee that a project sponsor would pay, as well as a fee that they would pay ongoing annually in perpetuity, as long as the encroachment is there. And so what is that annual fee? I thought I heard that Supervisor Peskin was the author of that fee, but
Oh,
correct me if I'm
describing the
wrong.
annual assessment fee? Sorry.
Yes.
So it is $3 annually per square foot.
Thank you. I just wanted to put that on the record for our public purposes, but thank you for that. And then also the maintenance fund that is now being established, again, because we're able to, you can issue something to non-fronting property owners. If you could just explain what that maintenance fund would be used for.
Yes, again, John Malamet through the chair. The maintenance fund would be would only be in the situation where the permittee is not the fronting property owner. So sometimes we've had situations, for example, where the project sponsor, a developer who's the original permittee, wants to assign the permit to a nonprofit group or some other entity who is not the fronting property owner. They don't have a real property that would be recourse to the city in case there are real problems there, and we'd have to put a lien on the property. So when there's not a fronting property owner, the city doesn't have good recourse. In the past, we used to require bonds to be posted, but the bonds, after the first year or two, permittees wouldn't pay the annual fee, so the bonds would expire. So this is a new mechanism in the situation where the permittee is not the fronting property owner to build up some sort of equity in a maintenance fund that DPW would control, and it could address maintenance and replacement problems or restoration, if that was necessary, at the location of the permit site where the permittee is paying this fee, or for other major encroachment permits elsewhere in the city where there are problems with maintenance or restorations needed because the permittee is now defunct or they're gone and the city has no one to go after to maintain the area.
Right, and so right now, without that maintenance fund, the city is essentially shouldering the cost if there's ever a situation where there might be vandalism or some sort of, disrepair of the encroachment area.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and then lastly, I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about when we have, there was mention of the large multi-phase projects. So for example, there might be some developments where there are development agreements, and how is it that we're streamlining the process for projects that might take, a decade or more to build that involve street encroachments as well?
John Malamet, again, through the chair. I think what we would typically see in some of these large multi-phase projects like Treasure Island or Candlestick, Hunters Point, is they're developed in multiple phases over a 10, 15, or 20-year lifespan. And what would have happened in the past before some of these changes in the law is we would have required a single major encroachment permit as for each phase. So every time a new phase came online where there were new encroachments that were going to be maintained by a homeowners association, there would be separate permits. The whole process would start up again at the Board of Supervisors. And so as each phase of the project rolled out, there would be another action at the Board of Supervisors. What this approach contemplates is there would be a single approval by the board for the entirety of the development. So for all of Treasure Island, for example, there would be a single permit that the Board of Supervisors approves. And then as each phase comes online and there's encroachments that are constructed as part of that in the streetscape that would be maintained by the homeowners association, those pieces get annexed into the master permit, and they would be handled administratively rather than returning to the board as each phase happens.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you for all your hard work on this for many, many years, and for taking all the lessons you have learned in the past and putting it into this streamlining piece of legislation.
Thank you.
Supervisor Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Farrell, and let me share Supervisor Tang's appreciation to staff and particularly to Deputy City Attorney Malamet for endeavoring to bring this law into the dawn of the 21st century and have appropriate appeal procedures. Some of the questions I was going to ask in my quick skim of the amendments that Supervisor Farrell passed out appear to be addressed. But I have a number of questions, particularly in and around revocation. And I think that there needs to be a second avenue for revocation. The way this is currently constructed, if the director chooses not to revoke, the board has no role. And I think, and I can foresee instances where, for whatever reasons, not relative to this department or this staff or this director, there may be instances in the future where the board, as a matter of public policy, may want to revoke, but will not have that opportunity if the Director of Public Works, in his or sole and absolute discretion, chooses to not approve that revocation. So, colleagues, I actually think that there may be instances in the future where the board should be able to step in and revoke affirmatively, and I think the legislation needs to provide for that. There is some language that is in the amendments on page 4 at subsection C, which I commend, which says, as a condition of permit revocation, the permittee shall return the public right-of-way to a condition satisfactory to the Public Works Director. I would respectfully suggest that that say at the permittee's sole and absolute expense. I mean, the reason major encroachment permits generally go to an elected body is because these public rights-of-way are property of the people of San Francisco, and they are issued in really seldom, in rare circumstances. I mean, we don't get that many major encroachment permits that come to the Board of Supervisors, as opposed to minor encroachment permits for the planter box on the sidewalk, which are dealt at an administrative level. And I think taking those very seriously as it relates to the public right-of-way is a very important function for an elected body. And to that end, I'm also a little reticent relative to the master encroachment permit issuance. And the reason I say that is because when you have projects like the one that Deputy City Attorney Malamet referred to, Treasure Island, with a build-out horizon that spans decades and phases that are, numerous, a lot of those major encroachments are not yet known. And the fact that a carte blanche, get-out-of-jail-free card is handed out by the board in this legislation greatly reduces the ability for the impacted public to appeal to an elected body for things that are not yet known or may change. I mean, I could see saying, to the extent that the encroachments are known, and to the extent that when the major, master encroachment permit is granted by the board, that staff has to stand up and say, here is every single encroachment that you are granting that are known. But I would be really reticent to, give away the board's power in 10 years when there is a fully developed community out there who's saying, whoa, we don't like what the developer is proposing relative to this major encroachment permit, and there's no mechanism for appeal to an elected body that, is elected by the good people who would then live on Treasure Island. So I think that needs a little more sussing out. But I think the first issue that I spoke to relative to having the board affirmatively be able to step into the revocation process, insofar as ultimately we are the granting authority, I think we should have the direct ability to revoke even if the Public Works Director chooses not to revoke. And I think that would be an important change. As it relates to the maintenance endowment, which I think is a very good concept, how will staff determine what the estimated annual maintenance cost is in any particular project? I guess that's a question for Mr. Sanguinetti. And what's the process there? And is there, if the permittee thinks that those, I know it says the city engineer shall verify said cost, but is there any avenue for appeal there if it's too high or if we think it's too low? And then there's the last issue, which is revocation is a lot more expensive than annual maintenance. And to the extent, granted, this happens extremely rarely, that there is a revocation, how does the city ensure that the permittee will pay for that at their sole and absolute expense, and I'm short of litigating to make them do it? That was a lot of questions.
John Malmer from the City Attorney's Office. I think I have five questions. I'm going to take them a little bit out of order.
As you see fit.
But from my standpoint, I think your proposed added language about being clear that the revocation and any kind of restoration that would be required is at the permittee's sole and absolute expense is fine. That's what we have in all of our permit forms. So it just makes something explicit that we usually already require in the permit itself. While I'm on the issue of revocation, I'll address two of your other points. I think when revocation happens and we have a fronting property owner, we have a mechanism built in when there's a fronting property owner into our permit scheme where if the permittee becomes a bad actor and they're not maintaining that, rather than having them post the maintenance bond up front like we used to do, the new permit scheme would require them to come out of pocket and pay the city 2 years of annual maintenance costs as a one-time payment. This is when the permittee is the fronting property owner. So when they're a bad actor, they have to pay, and then if they get back on track and do the proper work, we give them their money back. But if it's a situation where they give up and we need to go to revocation, we would have some money in that situation where you do have a fronting property owner who's the permittee. And if we can't recover the costs that might be necessary to restore from that money that they've had to post at that time, then we have the opportunity to lien them to try and collect that money. That's when it's a fronting property owner. When the permittee is not the fronting property owner, so it's a nonprofit or some other group, we don't have that kind of recourse if we had to get into the revocation arena. So that's why we feel that the endowment fund that we collect up front for the first 10 years of the project, that can either be used for maintenance or for restoration if necessary. So there will be a pool of money, at least that DPW would have, that they could tap into to do the restoration, to have the city do the restoration, rather than having to use their general fund allocation to do that. So that's the tools that we have that are partially built into this.
Yeah, if it's one of these streamlined can become 2.5-year projects, the amount of capital investment is going to be relatively low, and restoring it is going to be a much lower dollar value. But if it's a real big sticks and bricks project that does not have somebody that one can lean with the power of a non-judicial action, I mean, I don't know how many of those exist currently or are contemplated, but that's a huge liability for the city and is going to wipe out your endowment fund before you say go in the first time you have to use it.
I agree. I don't know. We've struggled to try and come up with better tools than we had, and I think this proposal does create some better tools, but it's not perfect. I mean, an example might be Mint Plaza, where the permittee is a nonprofit, and if something happened there where they're not paying for their maintenance and we had to get into the situation of revocation, it would be very costly for the city to try and, if the city wanted to restore it to a street, to be able to do
or as
it.
a hypothetical, not that this would happen because Mint Plaza is a public amenity, but if a future board of supervisors chose for whatever reason to reopen that street, not due to failure to maintain, and the nonprofit said, we're done, we're filing the chapter, we're dissolving ourselves, there's no way that it would pay for itself. And I guess maybe I would add a belt and suspenders provision, which is to the extent third parties that we cannot lien, that we have no real recourse against, are involved, that we do a belt and suspenders approach, and that is payment into the fund and maintenance of a capital bond. And if they fail to maintain that, then at least you have grounds for revocation, and you still have some, your maintenance, money. But I think that getting rid of the bond, this is only a handful of folks, isn't a good idea. We should keep the bond for those third parties.
The bond is a fine idea. We talked about there's some staffing issues to make sure on an annual basis that the bond remains active. And I think also the feeling was that at least we'd have some money with the maintenance endowment rather than having the permittee pay principal to a bank to try and keep a bond active. But we could certainly, we could add that. I don't see any reason.
Yeah, look, this is great legislation. I'm just trying to make it better, and I would suggest that that provision exists. Mint Plaza is a good example. Obviously, it's a great public amenity, but if in the year 2050 the board chose to return it to a street, God forbid, I think a bond would be a good recourse for the city to have.
Okay. The other item on revocation that I wanted to mention, you had suggested that there be a direct route to the Board of Supervisors for revocation. There are a few concerns I have about that, related primarily to the engineering-related decisions that might be connected with the encroachment permit. So these are, many of them do involve, some parts of them involve engineering decisions that the Director of Public Works, city engineer need to make in terms of the design of the permit. I also believe that if we were in a situation where we were revoking and there needed to be some kind of restoration, that also would involve some engineering decision. Can we bring back the street? Is there enough room? Do we have curbs and gutters, adequate sidewalk width, those kinds of decisions? So, and those decisions are, under state law, need to be made by a certified civil engineer. So I think the reason we set up the revocation process sort of starting with the Director of Public Works there were two reasons. One was because of the engineering decisions related to revocation and restoration. The other is that we require that the DPW director hold an administrative hearing so we could build a record about the reasons for the revocation. So if there were an appeal to the Board of Supervisors, you'd already have a record before you when you adjudicate on the appeal process.
Let me, if the chair will indulge me, give you a hypothetical. There was a period of time many decades ago, despite the admonitions of great city planners like Jane Jacobs, where cities, including San Francisco, were in the habit of building pedestrian bridges over streets. And we don't do that much, if at all, anymore in this or other American cities. And as a matter of fact, San Francisco, in addition to tearing down freeways, has torn down some of these pedestrian bridges over time, and I think that's been a great improvement to the public commons. Having said that, there are some of them remain, and I would imagine that as an engineering matter, they could be revoked. But as a political matter, maybe a very powerful landowner has political connections, and DPW, and I'm not suggesting that we want to change this, doesn't have a commission or commission hearings or what have you, or really the ability for the general public to come in and petition their government. Public Works is different than virtually every other function in government in that way. And the Director of Public Works, some director in the future, says, boy, I just got a call from the mayor, and the mayor just got a call from this powerful owner of a 50-story building who doesn't want his bridge torn down, and the director says, I'm not going to do revocation, even though it's feasible from an engineering standpoint. At that point, the board has no recourse because, as legislation is written, the director's decision is final and unappealable. So I'm looking for, I'm happy to take in the, I mean, this law is not going to be changed probably for another generation after we do this, an avenue for members of the public to get before the board. And I note that in certain instances here, you differentiate between engineering and non-engineering decisions. So maybe we could create a parallel scheme for appeals to the board where, for non-engineering reasons, the director does not revoke.
John Malamud from the City Attorney's Office. Thank you for those points. And what I'm thinking as a potential amendment is, and you'll remember this, it's something we worked on together for conditional use appeals.
5 members may bring.
Right. So maybe we could borrow that same process when there's an encroachment permit, elements that are not engineering related, that would allow for direct process before the Board of Supervisors.
Well, insofar as your amendments that Chair Farrell distributed borrow all of our appeals language on page 5, you might as well borrow that too. I think that's a great suggestion. But maybe John Givner doesn't think so.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. I mean, maybe we should discuss and potentially, if you're going to make amendments, make them tomorrow so that we can. I think this would be like a CU in some ways, but unlike a CU in that there's not a city department on the other side of that adversarial adjudicatory hearing, because in your scenario, DPW isn't taking a position on revocation. So you'd have a member of the public who has a property right and no one arguing on the other side at the board. And so it makes for, I think it would make for a unique proceeding. And so we should, figure out how it might work and maybe give you some thoughts.
And while you're on that, this was not one of the questions I asked, but is this on appeal to the board a administrative or quasi-judicial matter? And if so, what, if any, is the standard for review?
John Malamud from the City Attorney's Office. It would be an adjudicatory hearing because what the city is doing is taking away someone's permit rights. So they have a due process hearing right, which is why for some of these permits we've created a Board of Supervisors appeal process, and for others it would go to the Board of Appeals. I think the standard of review would be, it'd be probably the similar standard to what you have for other sort of land use decision matters that come before the Board of Supervisors.
Necessary, beneficial, and desirable, is that the standard?
It'd be something like that, yes. I mean, we don't have anything explicit in the legislation right now.
Well, if you're comfortable with that, I'm comfortable with that. It gives the board latitude.
Okay. So I have 2 more questions to respond to. You talked about the annexation process when there's a master encroachment permit, and maybe I could add some clarification here. These would be primarily for projects that get development agreement approvals by the Board of Supervisors, or they're for the redevelopment plan areas that are still in existence. And as part of the initial Board of Supervisors approval of those projects, all of them sort of have the same set of supporting documents that you're approving. So they all have an infrastructure plan and or a very detailed streetscape plan of exactly what the amenities are going to be on the public right-of-way. So when you do your initial approval of these projects, you are already approving what are going to be the future encroachment permit elements that are going to be associated with the project. And if there were any major change to what it was that was going to be installed, they would have to go through the process outlined in those development agreements to seek modifications of the infrastructure plan or the streetscape plan. And many of these development agreements are set up is that if there is a major modification where there's a new expanded liability that the city would incur as a result of changes, a lot of times those very changes come back to the Board of Supervisors, sort of independent of the whole major encroachment permit process. So my feeling is that in probably most cases, whatever would be annexed into the master encroachment permit, the Board of Supervisors has already approved as part of the initial approval of these large-scale projects.
If you said in all cases, you would have me, but the most cases disturbs me. And I would say if there were language in here that said everything is according to the plan that was reviewed by the board and seen by the public, I'm fine. But any changes to those which you may deem don't, or the city attorney or staff deem don't greatly expand the liabilities, when you're dealing with the public right-of-way and lands of the public, any changes from the originally approved plans should come back. That's this is, 20 years out.
We could certainly add language that would qualify that if someone's going to take advantage of the annexation process where the subsequent approvals are administrative, that it has to reflect something that the Board of Supervisors previously approved.
Works for me.
The last point was about a question about the maintenance endowment costs. And as we're rolling out this legislation along with a whole new encroachment agreement and permit template, and as part of that template, one of the attachments is the applicant/permittee needs to develop what the annual maintenance program would be and then assign costs to what that would be over the course of 1 year. And so that would be documentation that the Board of Supervisors would see as part of the encroachment permit approval. And the process would be that the city engineer would have to agree with the permittee applicant's cost estimates. And one of the things we'd like to do is try to standardize some of those costs. So we've added a provision here that talks about future regulations that Public Works would adopt. And one of the specific kinds of things would be this very issue, looking at are there cost formulations for materials that would be standardized on an annual basis.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, colleagues, we're going to open this up to public comment in a second here. I think principally now to Supervisor Peskin with all of these discussions here. How would you anticipate handling, and perhaps back to our Deputy City Attorney as well, memorializing this as we have a set of amendments that have been passed out. We have obviously some tweaking to be done here. Is this something that we can handle? I know there was a desire to have this as a committee report so we could potentially have a second reading before recess. But checking on desire and both, practicality of getting all these collective discussions, and seems to be agreements in the legislation.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. I think, practically speaking, because it's a committee report and needs to run through the clerk's office more or less immediately after this meeting, I would recommend that the committee adopt the amendments that have been presented in the amendment of the whole, and then we'll work on amendments for tomorrow reflecting today's discussion so it can get to the board tomorrow and you can make additional amendments tomorrow.
Given that we discussed that they be considered non-material, so we could pass it on a first reading?
You could pass these amendments on your first reading tomorrow.
Okay. Does that seem to work?
Yeah, I'd be happy, subject to public comment, to move the amendment of the whole with my additional at permittee sole and absolute expense, and then wait for, I think, 3 amendments 4 that I've requested staff, or Deputy City Attorney Malamet and Deputy City Attorney Givner to work on.
Okay. All right. Let's open this up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item 1? Shocking. Okay. No comment on public comment is closed. Okay. With that, then Supervisor Peskin has made a motion then to accept the amendments as presented. with the addition of, on page 4, line 16 through 18, clarifying that it's at the permittee's sole and absolute expense. Clear enough from a city attorney's perspective? Okay. Motion by Supervisor Peskin. Can we take that without objection? So moved. And then the underlying, Supervisor Peskin?
I would make a motion to send this to the full board without recommendation so that we can make sure that the amendments are consistent with our discussion, and then I'd be happy to work with John and John today and tomorrow, and then offer those amendments tomorrow.
Okay, great. So then we have a motion by Supervisor Peskin to move item number 1 forward without recommendation as a committee report for tomorrow's board meeting. Sound good? Okay. We take it without objection? All right, so moved. Thank you, everybody. With that, Madam Clerk, would you call item number 2, please?
Yes, item number 2 is an ordinance amending the transportation and urban design elements of the general plan to implement the city's Vision Zero policy regarding pedestrian safety, making appropriate findings, and affirming the planning department's determination.
Okay, thank you very much.
I just have one comment, Mr. Chairman, which is the second time is a charm.
Well, all right then. With that, to our planning department, thank you for coming.
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Lily Langlois with the Planning Department. We're here today to request your approval to update the general plan to reflect the city's Vision Zero policy. The Planning Commission initiated these changes at a hearing on April 13th and recommended approval at a hearing on May 18th. In crafting this legislation, we've worked closely with the SFMTA, as well as members of the public, also through the Vision Zero Task Force, the Pedestrian Safety Advisory Committee, Walk San Francisco, and members of the board. We're proposing to make changes to reflect the city's Vision Zero policy. As you know, this was adopted as official policy in 2014. And once this policy was adopted, many departments and agencies adopted resolutions in support of Vision Zero and outlined ways that their department could help achieve that goal. And the Planning Commission adopted a resolution saying that we would update the general plan to reflect this broader policy. The ordinance before you would amend the transportation element and the urban design element to reflect the city's Vision Zero policy. In October of last year, the Commission recommended approval to the board, and this legislation was before the board in January. But the ordinance was rejected by the board, and since that time we've done outreach to all the members of the Board of Supervisors, as well as to the Vision Zero Task Force, the TA's Vision Zero Committee, as well as the Vision Zero Coalition. So the ordinance before you is similar to what was before you in January, with some modifications to incorporate the feedback we've heard over the last 6 months. And this includes language around community engagement in developing streetscape plans, language to clarify when actuated signals are appropriate, language to emphasize that Vision Zero improvements will be implemented citywide, and we've removed the map of key walking streets from the general plan, but have incorporated it by reference, which allows us a little bit more flexibility to update it as conditions change. So that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, any questions or comments? Seeing none, we will open up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 2? Okay.
Yeah, my name is Otto Duffy. I'm from the North of Market Planning area, where I'm a resident, which is commonly known as the Tenderloin, which, as you know, is ground zero for Vision Zero. I'm not sure that my comments are applicable to this, but it is a concern that I have, so I noticed it was on the agenda, so I came in. My concern is that the Vision Zero have some flexibility in it, that as we go through the process and we make changes, that we are able to learn from those changes and alter, if necessary, if we notice changes, alter those changes, alter the plan. For example, the big one that I've noticed lately is on Eddy Street, where there's been a great deal of traffic coming, and yet if that's a stand-in for pedestrian safety, then that's been achieved, but yet they want to do things in addition to that. Another example would be how we've noticed now that if we're interested in pedestrian safety, it seems that the large number of Uber and Lyft vehicles that are flooding the streets would be a major focus for us if that was our interest. And how do we update the plan? Are we able to update the plan as we go along? And finally and lastly, I know we have the deadline of 2024 in the plan, but obviously this is a vision that has to go beyond 2024. It's got to extend beyond that. And as long as that there's some verbiage in the language that supports that. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment on item number 2? Seeing none, public comment is closed. Supervisor Peskin.
Well, ironically, I actually voted for this in committee last time, but when it got to the full board, everybody had problems, and then I ultimately agreed with them, but I will forward it with recommendation second time.
Okay. Motion by Supervisor Peskin, and we can take that without objection. Oh, motion as a committee report.
As a committee report.
To be clear. Okay. We can take that without objection. Madam Clerk, what do you call item number 3?
Yes, item number 3 is an ordinance amending the planning code to adopt the zoning control table for Valencia Street Neighborhood Commercial Transit District, which was deleted inadvertently from ordinance number 12917, making appropriate findings.
Mr. Starr is breaking a little bit of my heart.
All right, we can elaborate on that. Mr. Starr, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Supervisors. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs for the Planning Department. The item before you is an ordinance intended to correct a clerical error in the Article 7 ordinance, which will become effective on June 30th of this year. The ordinance will put back a zoning control table for the Valencia Street NCT, which was accidentally deleted from the final ordinance due to a clerical error. The Planning Commission considered the proposed changes on February 2nd of this year and recommended approval. And that concludes my remarks. I'm happy to answer questions about that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Supervisor Peskin, any further commentary?
No, I was just saying that because as I was running Mr. Starr through the paces on Article 7 and slowly but surely getting there, I was breaking little bits of his heart. Now he has to come and fix it, so I just want to get that off my chest.
Okay. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you. I know it was a really difficult piece of legislation given the voluminous number of pages. I'm just wondering, I'm just hoping that this won't happen again. So I know it was very difficult for you as well, but I'm not sure what happened exactly.
I'm not entirely sure either. I'm sure it had something to do with Word and the revisions and drafting, and it just fell off. So it is unfortunate.
Okay. All right. Well, after public comment, happy to put it back into the 700-page code cleanup legislation.
Okay. With that, we'll open up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 3? Seeing none, public comment is closed.
All right, I'll make a motion then to send forth this item to the full board with positive recommendation as a committee report.
Motion by Supervisor Tang. We can take that without objection. Thank you. Madam Clerk, what do you call item number 4?
Yes, item number 4 is a resolution extending interim zoning controls to require conditional use authorization for indoor agriculture uses and affirming planning department's determination under CEQA.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Lisa. Thanks for coming.
Lisa Pagan, Office of Economic and Workforce Development. Good afternoon, Chair Farrell, committee members. I'm here to ask for your support for the extension of the interim controls. So could you turn on the slides, do you mind?
SFGov TV, we have a presentation.
Yes. Okay, great. Yes, we're asking for an extension of the interim controls for indoor agriculture. On November 8th, 2016, voters authorized Prop 64, AOMA, and this legalizes cannabis cultivation and commercial sale to persons 21 years of age. Businesses will not be able to begin growing, making, selling marijuana under this law until January of 2018. This has presented an opportunity for San Francisco, small businesses and entrepreneurs, as it opens an entirely new subset of opportunities for business. While this is exciting, it does pose some challenges for our industrial sector. San Francisco has taken bold steps to protect our industrial spaces in the city. A majority of this land is zoned in the eastern part of our city, Bayview, Mission, and Soma. The retention and growth of industrial businesses is a constant focus for our city, as is the real estate landscape is very tight in these areas. Cannabis is a new PDR subsector, cultivation of cannabis, agricultural cultivation. Our work with industrial cannabis businesses and the task force has allowed us to learn more about this subsector. We believe that industrial cannabis businesses are overall in line with traditional PDR subsectors, and that cannabis business will bring an exciting new opportunity for growth in business and workforce development. As with all industries, we must ensure that PDR sector remains diverse so it can continue to provide the cross-section of good middle-income jobs for residents without a four-year degree, while also helping to ensure that our PDR businesses are better equipped to handle different economic downturns. Additionally, we want to ensure that no one neighborhood sees an unexpected over-concentration of a specific business type, and in this case, indoor cannabis cultivation we're looking at. For this reason, an extension of interim controls on indoor agricultural uses, including cannabis, is needed in order to ensure that our original PDR policies and goals are met. These goals include maintaining economic diversity and stability of the PDR sector and preventing an over-concentration of businesses in certain geographic areas that are zoned PDR. So the interim controls extension, basically this would require that any new indoor agricultural use continue to get a conditional use authorization from the Planning Commission. We originally introduced these interim controls on November 15th, 2016. They were unanimously adopted by the board in January 24th, 2017. And the proposed extension of the interim controls will ensure the city has time it needs to continue to develop comprehensive policy around marijuana cultivation. Additionally, let's see. The state right now is still in the process of working out its final regulations related to the cannabis sector, and our local permanent regulations will need to work within these final state regs, which are still being clarified. It's a pretty complicated issue that involves many state agencies, including the Department of Agriculture, Department of Health, Bureau of Cannabis, and then multiple city agencies are also working on this. Based on Mayor Lee's executive directive from last November, city departments, the Department of Public Health, the Planning Department, OEWD, the City Administrator, Fire, DBI, Department of Environment, we've been meeting over the past 6 months to develop recommendations for a citywide regulatory framework for cannabis. We focused on issues of public health and safety, land use, social justice, and reducing exposure to youth. Among this group's, interdepartmental group's recommendations was to create an Office of Cannabis. The proposed legislation for the Office of Cannabis, sponsored by Supervisor Sheehy, was heard at Rules Committee last week. It will be heard again tomorrow at Budget and Finance, and it could be referred to the board for a first reading as early as tomorrow. This office is needed to coordinate multiple departments in San Francisco involved in the permitting process and to help respond to public and business needs. This new proposed office is intended to regulate the full supply chain of the cannabis industry from seed to sale, and will include the development and implementation of permanent regulations for the industry in San Francisco. We're on track to propose the overall framework for the board's consideration in the coming months. Key aspects of the framework include land use, licensing considerations along the entire cannabis supply chain. Because the state has not yet finalized its regulatory scheme and is currently in the process of promulgating emergency regulations pursuant to SB 94, the trailer bill that just passed with the state budget, the new Office of Cannabis, once established, will work with sister departments like DBI and Fire to ensure their codes and procedures adequately address the needs of this new industry and comply with the state regulations. We will further engage businesses from now forward, both in cannabis and other PDR sectors, and we will continue to work with residents of our industrial neighborhoods and our communities to talk about the proposed framework and the permanent regulations. We will further, so major decision points for cannabis cultivation permanent regulations will include land use and licensing, and these will develop a clear permit process that provide cannabis industrial businesses with a straightforward process to compliance. They will also help provide regulations that ensure our controls around chemicals and pesticides and power, et cetera, are sufficient. They will also include protections to promote continuous diversification of PDR uses in San Francisco within our industrial zoned areas. We expect to have permanent controls in place by January 2018 and expect to present them to you in September. So with that, we hope that you will approve the extension of the interim controls, as we think we need more time to develop the permanent framework. If you have any questions, I'm here, as well as the mayor's office. Mawuli is here as well to answer additional questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Tang.
Thank you, Ms. Pagan. I was wondering if you have a better sense of the timeline for when the state regulations would come down and when we as a local body would also be conforming our regulations to the state.
I don't know exactly when the state, I think they're still in process, but they're supposed to be up and running in terms of licensing by January 1st. In terms of having the process for the state licensing. So their goal is to get the licensing regulations all set by January 1st. And that's our goal too, is to have ours in place by January 1st.
So we don't have any sense of when you're going to be discussing with state officials kind of drafts or anything like that?
We've been ongoing.
Good evening, Board. Supervisor Tang. So we do not have a specific timeline from them, but we are in close communication with them, and I know that, as Lisa said, the goal is to have everything in place and ready by January 1st, but no, unfortunately, right now, there is no specific timeline.
But are there regular, say, working meetings and so forth to ensure that this is going to make it in time for January 1st?
Yes, absolutely, both on the state level and here and locally.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
And pursuant to Supervisor Tang's question, this is a 12-month extension, but it sounds to me like you don't really need a 12-month extension. You need an extension through the end of this calendar year.
Yes, Supervisor Peskin, that would be correct, and we would be more than amenable with an amendment to that effect.
Okay, thanks very much. Seeing no further questions or comments, open up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 4? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Colleagues, this item is in front of us.
So I would recommend, and I'm just getting the language in front of me, that we change in the 12-month resolved on, I believe that is page 3, where it says 12 months, we should change it to December 31st, 2017. I just had that up, and, excuse me, it is on page 4 on line 5, shall remain in effect. We could either put in the number of months, or if Mr. Givner does not object, say, shall remain in effect until December 31st, 2017.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. Yeah, using the specific date works.
Yeah, but the way it says, the way it reads is from the expiration of the interim. Yeah, I got it. Just so strike from the expiration of the internal controls established by, and say, in effect until December 31st, 2017, or until the adoption of the permanent legislation, whichever comes first.
Okay. We have a motion then by Supervisor Peskin, and just to be clear from the sponsors to our mayor's office, that works for everybody as well. I just want to make sure everyone's on board. Okay. Motion by Supervisor Peskin. Can we take that without objection? So move. And then Supervisor Peskin, Supervisor Tang, then the underlying item as amended. Can we forward that with a positive recommendation as a committee report for tomorrow's board meeting?
So moved.
Okay. Motion by Supervisor Peskin again, and we can take that without objection. Okay, thank you very much. With that, Madam Clerk, would you call item number 5, please?
Yes, item number 5 is a hearing on the new information compiled for the 2017 point-in-time homeless count and requesting the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing to report.
Okay, thank you. And colleagues, thank you for listening to this hearing today. It's a hearing that I called for a while ago. Obviously, we continue to be at a crisis level here in San Francisco as it relates to homelessness. Number one issue as it relates to residents and businesses and visitors. Continues to be a major issue for all of us here inside of City Hall. So every 2 years, as part of our HUD mandate for receiving federal funds, communities across the country participate in their respective homeless point in time counts in order to measure the prevalence of homelessness on our streets and our communities. This biennial count serves as a marker for our success or failures addressing homelessness in our city and across the country. And we're able to see bluntly the data that is spit out. I know some question the methodology of the count, but at least the count has been consistent, certainly over the past decade. So I do believe the information is helpful for our city to inform our policies and our practices. For the last 2 point-in-time counts, I hosted a hearing to discuss the results and working on the implementation to reduce homelessness in citywide coming afterwards. And while I think we all agree that the status quo on our streets continues to be simply unacceptable, I want to note that our city's commitment to addressing the issue through new and I believe effective budget investments has helped stem the tide of homelessness rising here in San Francisco. Again, although I would completely agree that public sentiment does not reflect that, but as you look at the data, it is the truth. And this is during the course of the worst housing crisis we've ever experienced as a city. Overall, we saw a slight decrease in our unsheltered homeless population. And while no one is going to be shouting from the rooftops about the slight decrease, it's important to note that while other cities in the Bay Area and counties, and certainly up and down the state and across the West Coast, are experiencing over double-digit percentage increases in their homeless populations, we have not here in San Francisco. And our laser-focused strategy around housing first, I think, has helped really support that. Again, we have a long road to go. Everyone believes it's still the number one issue facing us as a city. But I do think there's also time to acknowledge when we look at the hard data, especially compared to where other jurisdictions have gone in the past few years, about what we're doing right and what we can continue to work on. And I also want to say thank you to all the people that participated that led the homeless count. This year was the second time my wife and I actually came out and participated in it, which is an eye-opening experience, but I think certainly worthwhile of people to come really get a flavor for all the volunteer work. And thank you to all the residents of San Francisco, quite frankly, that came out, because there were hundreds, and I thought it was pretty amazing. So with that, again, thank you to all the staff that's been working on this issue. Thank you to our department. I know Jeff could not be here today on a family vacation, but I want to invite our department to come up. I believe there's a presentation that we should not be scared of, given the length of it, because I understand that you are adept at running through it quickly, but want to say thank you for coming up and putting this together, and look forward to kind of this discussion here.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you to the committee for having us present. I'm Emily Cohen. I'm the policy manager with the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, and I'm going to give you a brief presentation on the 2017 point-in-time count. I'm also joined here today by Applied Survey Research, who is our technical assistance provider throughout the point-in-time count, through the methodology, implementation, and analysis of the count, and they will be giving you some background information on their findings across the communities they work with, as well as dig deeper into our methodology. So as Supervisor Farrell mentioned, every 2 years, San Francisco and all communities participate in the HUD-mandated point-in-time count. San Francisco continues to make improvements on its methodology, but generally speaking, we've used the same strategy for the count over several years, which allows us to compare our progress as we move forward. So before I get into the findings of the San Francisco point-in-time count, I want to invite up Susan Brentley from Applied Survey Research to give us some background on our methodology.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you very much for that beautiful introduction. Yes, I get to talk about the methodology, and we actually love talking about the methodology. HUD does require this, and they require that it takes place not only every 2 years, but it must be done within a 24-hour period. So it must also be conducted in the last 10 days of January, which makes it difficult. This is a blitz count, which means that we conduct it over a very short period of time. And one of the reasons that we do so is to reduce duplication, which is our enemy in terms of the count. The total coverage means that it is a census. We cover every single street, part, and area of the entire city. And we do so with using our community volunteers, and it's a pleasure that you and your wife were with us and even participated in the training. We do a lot of quality control to make sure that, as Emily says, the methodology is based in a consistent way but continues to improve. This year, we had a dedicated youth count, which required additional outreach to a very traditionally undercounted and underrepresented group. We'll talk to you a little bit more about the methodology about that. Over 750 volunteers participated, including service providers, outreach workers, city and county staff, and community members. And it's a fantastic event. So something different this year, though. San Francisco jumped on the bandwagon immediately when HUD transmitted that it would be requesting and requiring a youth count, was a dedicated youth outreach effort done this time, establishing the baseline year as 2017. San Francisco's been participating and piloting youth methodologies since 2013. What that meant is that we were able to count unaccompanied children under the age of 18 and transition-aged youth, 18 to 24, who are not in community shelters. The other thing to know about that is that, again, youth service providers and currently or recently homeless youth conduct both the street count and the surveys, and again, of unaccompanied youth and children. Youth providers and youth identify maps for our hot spots where we expect to see youth that are experiencing homelessness and that they are known to congregate. They identify on the map, and then we deploy those youth to count. And this is, again, based on an ability to unduplicate counts. We had 229 number of surveys that were conducted by youth peers, and we did deduplicate based on some of those findings. A little bit more, as the chair mentioned, about the larger context and what's been happening in the count of points in time comparing 2015 to 2017. This is HUD reported data for comparability. And what you can see is, Emily will talk to you about some of the details, but the count is staying relatively stable, while communities around the Northern California, up and down the state, are experiencing huge increases. So we wanted to get that information in front of you, and what you'll see is, for example, Los Angeles, about 57,000 reports of homelessness. It was an increase by 30%. Same thing, Alameda County, up by 39%. Sacramento County, up by 30%. So what you'll see is that there are large increases. Some of them may be due to methodological changes, but one of the things to really mention is that the stability of the homeless population probably is likely because of your fantastic commitment, the partnerships, the deep investments, and the support that you have had from many of your programs. Trends that we have experienced in our counts that we have seen are many communities are seeing increases in the number of individuals experiencing chronic homelessness. Communities are also seeing an increase in unsheltered rates of homelessness, over nearly 70%. Santa Clara County is reporting 74% unsheltered, while Alameda County is reporting over 69%. Also, there we have seen longer-term decreases in the overall percentage of the population experiencing homelessness who identify as veterans. And also, we will see a 4% decrease in the number of persons experiencing homelessness who are veterans. We also see that some of the communities are changing their methodology, and honestly, some of them are using the methodology that San Francisco and Applied Survey Research have used together. We have also seen, and we think has a bearing on the increases that other communities have reported, an increase in unaccompanied children and youth, and we think that has a bearing on some of those increases. Many communities have also experienced better ability to calculate information because of HMIS. Just very quickly, This is the HUD definition of what homelessness looks like. Very important to meet the HUD definition, particularly in terms of regularly sleeping in accommodations that are unfit for human beings. I think the main point here is that San Francisco has a different definition of homelessness, an expanded definition of homelessness that includes particularly single-room occupancy, doubling up, and again in individuals that are in hospitals, rehabilitation facilities, and staying in jails. So that is different than the definition that San Francisco uses in its point in time count, and I'm only saying that is because San Francisco wants to take advantage and honor its expanded definition, but it also needs to be reflective of the HUD definition. And what the San Francisco point in time count definition is that it includes the people residing in jails, hospitals, and rehabilitation facilities. So that's the slight difference with the definition from HUD. With that, I am going to turn it over to Emily, and she's going to share the data with you.
Thanks. Can I ask you just a quick question? Just a quick question for you. Look, just in this comparative data, I think one of the key themes, or the takeaways, at least from my point of view, is ask anybody in San Francisco, any resident, they think the biggest issue, certainly one of the top 2 or 3, is our homelessness, and the sentiment, without a doubt, is it's getting worse. But you look at the data, and it says something different. It's staying the same. So we can talk about why that matters, or why people are perceiving it to be a greater and greater issue. And I think there's some hypotheses out there about why that makes sense. But as it relates to now, your slide, or the slide here about the comparisons to other counties.
Yes.
Do you have some takeaways here? Other counties are seeing massive increases. And you don't want to tell your residents, oh, just go somewhere else and you'll see it's worse than here. That's not the answer we're looking for. We want to face the music here head on in San Francisco, and what can we do here? But could you talk about it a little bit? Are there reasonings why? What are you seeing? Because you're seeing this across different counties. Right. Why are you seeing this in other jurisdictions and not here? From your point of view. Again, I'm going to ask that for our other folks too, but given that you're the survey team, I'd be interested.
Well, I do think that you've paid a lot of attention about the methodology. And as Emily mentioned, there's been improvements. But the core standard piece of the methodology has stayed consistent. And we've been working with you for almost 10 years. So that's a huge deal. And I told you that I love the methodologies. But when you're counting something like this, the methodologies really are key. So first of all, a common methodology. Second of all, you already included youth. You started looking at youth even before it was required. You mentioned yourself the amount of investments and the intentionality that the entire city, all of the departments are giving in terms of making a difference within the population. You have SROs. They are unique to San Francisco in many ways. I think that you've not taken up this magnet theory, which a lot of the other cities within the Bay Area and counties have tried to say. They're coming here because of the support, and actually that takes away from the actual localness of the issue. And I think that is really important in terms of the intentionality with which you look at your programming. So the methodology, I think your acknowledgement of the housing issue itself as being the primary driver, and I also think you have a larger expansion of the underlying challenges and what results in homelessness here. You have a really strong department, and they work together not only in terms of social supports but in terms of health too. Those are the things that keep the numbers at least steady. And what you'll see is communities that try to shy away from it, that try to adopt the magnet theory, they don't actually make the types of investments that you have.
So let me ask you this then. Given your vast experience that you're not only here in San Francisco but in very many other jurisdictions, do you believe in the magnet theory?
No, I don't.
Okay, because
And
it's...
we spend a lot of time trying to debunk the magnet theory, because when the kinds of conversations that you're having, the San Francisco needs to have is to unchunk the population, to really look at veterans, to look at families, to look at youth, to look at chronic, to look at those with disabling conditions, to look at those in terms that very recently became homeless. All of those require strategies that are completely different. And that's the type of thing that your county staff and team looks at.
So, last question, and thank you for your responses. We obviously have a major issue here in our city. It's been that way for a long time, since I grew up here. What we've also seen, though, is other jurisdictions respond in different ways. I take Los Angeles County as an example. Now, over the past, 2 years, they've passed a huge bond
Yes.
for homeless housing. They've passed a huge tax measure increase for ongoing funding of the issue. Aside from LA, and perhaps, and if you're not the right one, I don't want to put you on the spot of something that you wouldn't claim expertise to, but have you seen any other innovative, kind of larger scale approaches to addressing the issue? I mean, I get LA County, 30%. I'm sure, I know they're feeling it as well. But I think one of the things we want to look to going forward in San Francisco is what are some larger ways we can impact this, not just around the edges, but really make a difference. Any other things you've seen from other jurisdictions, or does that stand out to you as, wow, these guys are actually putting their, not certainly money where their mouth is, but certainly putting a step forward in terms of really saying they're going to make a difference going forward?
Well, I think the counties and the communities that are really making progress are unchunking the populations. They're really focusing in on housing first and transition, and really moving folks along the pathway to permanent and supportive housing. And that emphasis on supportive housing is really key. The communities that we have seen being successful also really paying attention to their youth homelessness and really understanding what that's like for families. I'm very pleased that San Francisco really does pay attention to the doubling and tripling up. You're not just ignoring that. I think that's unique to you. I would say that the conditions that create homelessness and lack of housing, particularly mental health, I think are really important. And you're already doing some of that as work as well, and that's where we're seeing the field go. A little bit more intentionality about preventing evictions, preventing first time of homelessness. And yes, you are right, our entire team is probably chomping at the bit to say more. Our project directors right now are at the National Alliance to End Homelessness speaking, so I could go much further. But the data for us is really the key thing, and using the partnerships with your community programs to turn the curve and to really intentionally get the numbers out. And I would say that San Francisco's done a fantastic job in terms of its transparency with the numbers. There's a lot of informal supports that are also taking place that other communities are doing. The faith-based organizations, the nonprofits, the ability to feed, the ability to help. All of those things help prevent homelessness, which is a lot of getting rid of the homeless number.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before I delve into exactly what we found in the count, it's, I think, important to look at what happened between 2015 and 2017 as our city was working to address homelessness. Not only was the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing formed, but between 15 and 17, nearly 3,500 people were moved out of homelessness through city programs. And additionally, the city opened 625 units of new units of permanent supportive housing during that 2-year window. We also expanded shelter capacity by 222 beds through navigation centers and new shelter programs. Additionally, we increased investments totaling a 13% increase, and you can see here where these investments were targeted: an 11% increase in TAY homelessness funding, transitional age youth, 17% increase for families, and 11% increase for adults. So all of these factors contribute to what Susan was saying around the steady state of the point in time count. So the big number, our high-level number, is that we found that on January 26, 2017, 7,499 people experienced homelessness. 513 identified through the youth count, and the remainder through our general point-in-time count. And obviously, we want this number to be 0. No point-in-time count is good, and we want to, but you can see since 13 that these numbers have held relatively steady. 58% of the population in San Francisco is unsheltered, while the remaining folks experiencing homelessness are in either shelters, hospitals, rehab facilities, or jails here in San Francisco. And this has also stayed steady since about 13. This map shows a distribution of where folks experiencing homelessness, both sheltered and on the street, lie, and the concentration of folks is mainly in District 6, District 10. We often get asked if folks experiencing homelessness in San Francisco are from San Francisco, so this is an important question that we ask on the survey. As part of the homeless count, we surveyed over 1,100 people experiencing homelessness on the street through a peer model, and what we found is 69% of the people experiencing homelessness in San Francisco were housed in San Francisco when they became homeless. 21% from other counties in California, and the remaining 10 from other parts of the country. Additionally, in the survey, we ask about age, and what I think is important in this slide is to see that the under 25 section of our population is growing, as is the over 61 section. Race and ethnicity is asked in 2 questions, similar to the census, and I think the takeaway here is that people of color, particularly African Americans in our city, and people who identify as multiracial are drastically overrepresented in the homeless population, as are Latino, Hispanic folks. LGBT folks are also drastically overrepresented in the homeless population. When asked if folks identified as LGBT, 30% of the total population answered yes, and this graph shows a little bit of a breakdown. And in terms of gender, this year we've asked about transgender status, but we asked for the first time this year about gender queer, gender non-binary, and we did see 1% identify. In terms of health conditions people on the streets and in our shelters face, obviously very significant. 68% of the respondents to the survey reported 1 or more health conditions. We also ask about primary cause of homelessness, and you can see there's a wide array. These are the top 5 that people picked, but a number of different factors and often contributing factors causing homelessness, from loss of jobs to argument with families. And this is a little bit different when you pull out the youth-specific data. You'll see more representation within the argument with family or being asked to leave home as a primary cause of homelessness. So HUD requires us to drill down into several subpopulations. And so for this portion of the presentation, we will be using the HUD definition of homelessness because that is required. And you can see here that between 13 and 17, we had a 28% decrease in youth identified through the point-in-time count. Obviously still too high, but trending in the right direction. A large number, the vast majority of homeless children and youth are unsheltered in our community. And the primary causes of homelessness, as I mentioned before, differ from the older population a bit, with more folks identifying argument with family or friends as their primary cause of homelessness. Youth distribution of where folks are staying, either sheltered or unsheltered, is also slightly different than the adult population. While we still see a high concentration in Districts 6 and 10, we also see quite a few folks in District 8 and in the Park, which is similar but not exact with the older population. Another difference with the older population is that 49% of youth experiencing homelessness identify as LGBT, and there's a little bit more diversity in the gender identity of youth experiencing homelessness as well. Families is another subpopulation that HUD is really focused on. In the 17 count, we identified 190 families with 601 people in them, and this represents a 17% decrease between 2013 and 2017 of family homelessness. Something I think is really good and strong is that Chronic homelessness among families is down by 77%, and I think that that speaks to our efforts to move families out of homelessness as quickly as possible. And unsheltered family homelessness is down by 45%. So we know that the point-in-time count is not the end-all and be-all when it comes to family homelessness data. We know that there are families that are missed by this count, and so we also look at San Francisco Unified School District data. And from the height of homelessness among SFUSD students in 2011, we have seen a 21% reduction in student homelessness. The vast majority of families, 97%, identified through the count were sheltered. So the adult population is not a specific one that HUD requires us to look at, but is important to us here in San Francisco. And this is an area where we have seen some increases, 4% increase in the general adult population between 15 and 17. We saw increases in our jail population and in folks in hospitals. And the drastic increase in hospitals is due to much better process of reporting for hospitals to participate in the PIT count. So chronic homelessness, another area that we have been extremely focused on from the federal level and locally, is an area that we have struggled in. Between 13 and 17, we saw a 7% increase in chronic homelessness, and this speaks to the extended period of time I think that people are experiencing homelessness. And on the family side, we've seen a significant improvement, 77% reduction. So veterans, again, another really important subpopulation that HUD is focused on, as are we. In San Francisco, between 2013 and 2017, chronic homelessness among veterans has decreased by 47%. This is the area that we have been incredibly focused and have a very robust partnership with the Housing Authority and the VA to move veterans experiencing chronic homelessness off the streets and into housing. And these numbers are very consistent with our administrative data of what we're seeing in terms of our priority list of chronically homeless veterans to house. Veterans who are not chronically homeless have increased in our community, as have they increased in many communities around the Bay Area and the state. We also do a better job of sheltering our veterans than we do of sheltering other populations. And I think that's due to really intensive outreach to veterans. So these are my sort of takeaways, our takeaways from the point-in-time count, is that we have seen decreases in homelessness in areas where we've made strategic investments, that homelessness disproportionately impacts people of color and LGBTQ people. Homelessness is dynamic and the population moves and shifts. And that people experiencing homelessness in San Francisco have extended lengths of homelessness, which contributes to our large chronically homeless population. And that due to our significant investments, we have been able to hold our homeless population number relatively stable while we've seen these very significant increases in some of our neighboring communities. And while that's not good and that's not where we want to be, I think it's important to take stock of sort of the dynamics playing out around us. And lastly, I just want to thank everybody who participated in the PIT count. We had over 750 volunteers. It was the most volunteers that we've had before. Supervisor Farrell, you were there. Supervisor Ronan was there. We had a tremendous turnout from city family, nonprofits, and I especially want to thank the youth and the youth providers who led the youth count. It would not be possible to get an accurate count of youth experiencing homelessness without their knowledge, expertise, and insight, and their leadership of really getting a best practice youth count done here in San Francisco. So big thank you to everyone who's participated.
Thank you.
Happy to take questions.
Thank you for the presentation and running through that. A few questions. Surprising on the veterans number, given the amount of investment. I know Mayor Lee has made that a priority, and I think it's been great. We still have relatively high numbers. I guess you're saying maybe it's better than other jurisdictions, however, which seems to be a little bit of a theme going on here. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yep. So, yes. So San Francisco has focused very intensely on veterans experiencing chronic homelessness. So over a year of homelessness and a disabling condition or multiple episodes of homelessness. And that population where we have put the resources in terms of supportive housing, we've been project basing a lot of our VASH units, which has helped us get more veterans into housing more quickly. We've seen that 47% decrease. Unfortunately, because we're focusing, I think, on this very significant part of the population, other components of the population have not moved into housing as quickly. We've also had a lot of really increased ability to place veterans in the community using mobile VASH vouchers, which is something that has really picked up over the last 6 to 9 months, and we're really excited about that work that we've been able to do in the community.
All right, that's good to hear. Last one, obviously the major kind of takeaway, one of them is pretty big increase on our single adult population. Any color that you want to provide behind that, and kind of maybe as well then what we're looking to do about that?
Yeah, definitely, and invite Sam to jump in as well. I think we can see where we've invested specifically on families and on youth. We have seen these decreases. I think the increase in the single adult population speaks to what our constituents in San Francisco feel on the street every day, and the frustration that I know we all hear and we all feel when we walk around our community and see folks outside. And so I think that is very real, and that speaks to what's happening in our community. I think reducing chronic homelessness in San Francisco will impact the streets, right? Not everyone living on the streets is chronically homeless, but we know if we focus in on folks who have been homeless the longest and are the most vulnerable, we will be able to, and move those folks into housing, we will be able to address homelessness on our streets, and that'll have an overall positive impact. So I know we've outlined the goal of reducing chronic homelessness in our community by 50%, and that is something that we're really eager to move forward on, through our investments with Tipping Point and local investments. It's an area of big priority for the community and for the department. I don't know if anything else you wanted to add.
Supervisor Farrell, Committee, the Sam Dodge Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. Certainly our work through the navigation centers is really to bring to bear the resources that we know are needed for people to resolve their homelessness when they're chronically homeless. We weren't able to really serve that well when people are on the street. We know the majority of people experiencing long-term homelessness are living in our streets and in encampments in our community. So the ability to bring them into a navigation center, a place that they'll willingly go and be able to go through the somewhat process of accessing supportive housing, getting their income on, getting their IDs, being able to wait for those vacancies to come up. And that should help us over the long term, because one thing we know about homelessness is it's really experienced in two very dramatically different ways. Sort of long-term homelessness that's unlikely to resolve on its own without extraordinary efforts, and sort of short, brief episodes of housing crisis. And so, the ability to be able to match the resources we have to what people need to be able to end their homelessness is going to be important for us to make progress.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you guys. Supervisor Tang?
Thank you very much for all of your hard work to the entire department. I was just wondering, in terms of your numbers regarding it's on page 27, the chronic homelessness has decreased among families. Chronic homelessness among families has decreased by 77%. How did you measure that?
So that is measured through our survey. So we ask folks how long they've experienced homelessness and the disabling conditions that they might experience, and then from there are able to pull out those folks who we identify in the survey who meet the definition of chronically homeless. And so we distribute, like I said before, over 1,100 people complete the survey. That is families, adults, veterans, youth, both on the street and in our shelter programs.
And I'm sorry if I missed it from earlier, but what is your definition in terms of how long someone has been homeless for them to qualify as chronic homeless?
To be chronically homeless under the HUD definition, you be homeless for more than a year and have a disabling condition, or have 4 episodes of homelessness and a disabling condition.
Okay, and so so the survey would just be, again, kind of self-verification from whoever's filling it out as to how long they've been. Okay.
Yep, all of this information is pulled through a survey where folks self-identify. We are hoping, as our one system, our new data system, gets up and running over the next few years, that we'll also be able to use administrative data for some of this. But for right now, the survey is the methodology we've been using for the past several point-in-time counts.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. Any further questions or comments? Okay, thank you to staff. Thank you for being here and for the team conducting the survey. With that, we'll open up to public comment. Anybody wish to comment on item number 5?
Hi, Supervisors. Thank you very much. My name is Mary Kate Bacalao. I live in District 8 and I work in District 6 at Larkin Street Youth Services, where I'm the Director of Public Funding. And I wanted to highlight some of the key takeaways from the combined PIT and youth count this year. So there's 1,363 homeless youth counted in the 2017 PIT count, and that's down from 1,569 in 2015. So that's 1,363 youth experiencing homelessness locally, which is about 1 in every 5 persons experiencing homelessness here in San Francisco. Youth homelessness decreased by about 13% between 2015 and 2017. And finally, another key takeaway is that approximately 87% of homeless youth in San Francisco are unsheltered. That's a combined between the TAY, the transition age youth number, and the unaccompanied minor number. So if you mash those together, it's about 87%. That's a very high unsheltered number, and according to the 2016 AHAR data, it's actually the nation's highest. San Francisco, among major cities, has the highest unsheltered numbers. So those are some major takeaways for homeless youth from the PIT count this year. There are also certain things that the PIT count just inherently isn't designed to tell us. So we don't know the reason for the 13% decrease. I'm very optimistic about it, and I think that the reason is because the city ramped up its investment in homeless youth, about 15% between 2013 and 2017. And finally, what the PIT count isn't designed to tell us is the number of youth who experience homelessness each year. It's a 24-hour number. It's not an annualized count. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to comment on this item?
Hello, Supervisors. Can you hear me? Full disclosure, I'm actually a reporter. I write for Randy Shaw's Beyond Cron.
Why don't you pull the microphone closer in? There you go.
I've actually never done this, so this is my first public comment, so
welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity. With the annual budget of $8.96 billion, I think San Francisco can do a little bit more to alleviate this issue. 7,000 homeless people given a 4-hour count in the middle of the night isn't necessarily a legitimate count. I think it should be recounted given the 24-hour parameters that HUD gives us. I think we need to build more housing. I think people need to stop being displaced. I think we need to help people find homes. I think we need to do more than count people in the middle of the night for 4 hours. I don't think that's an adequate solution, and I thank you for your time and your bold move with Home SF. That was really appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment on item number 5? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Again, thank you to the team that did the count. Thank you to our homeless department for being here in the presentation. Look forward to continuing to work on the issue, and I know we'll have some follow-up strategy discussions at the Land Use Committee here. So with that, colleagues, unless any objection, could I have a motion to file item number 5? Motion by Supervisor Peskin, and we can take that without objection. All right, Madam Clerk, do we have any other business in front of us?
There's no further business.
All right, thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.